yourself, Megan will mute you. And speaking of Megan, let me introduce Megan Schneider. She is our new quad agency coordinator. She replaced Lauren Zabinski, who left, and we're really excited that Megan has joined the team. She has a really varied background that I think is gonna serve us all well. She started her career at Children at Risk. She's worked for the Houston Literacy Foundation, and just prior to this, she actually managed some really large-scale transformational projects working with Deloitte. So she's got just a great background, and we're really excited to have her on board. Megan is going to be facilitating today's meeting. So Megan, say hello to everyone. If Megan can hear me. Can you hear me, Megan?
I can. Your meeting facilitator couldn't quite get off mute. So hello, everyone. It's so nice to meet you all.
Yay. In fact, so with that, I think, let's see, we're gonna go to minute approval for the March 2021 minutes. So I want to make sure that everybody has a copy of the minutes. You received them in an email from Megan. You also have them attached to the meeting agenda. So want to see if there are any comments on the draft that you received. All right. And hearing none, is there a motion?
Reagan, I make a motion to approve the minutes of the March meeting.
Okay, and state your name before you approve.
Alfirma Giles.
Thank you, Alfirma. So we have a motion by Alfirma. Is there a second?
This is Kathy Abba. I will second that motion.
Thank you very much. So with that, if there's not any discussion, then Megan is going to conduct a roll call vote. And this roll call vote will also serve as our roll call to make sure who we have attending. So Megan, let me turn it over to you.
Yeah, thanks so much. All right, so members, as Reagan mentioned, I will conduct a roll call vote to approve the March 2021 draft meeting minutes. Please reply for, against, or abstain when I call your name. Alfirma Giles.
For.
Amber Scanlon.
For.
April Crawford.
She just sent me a message saying that she's here. Maybe you can hear her. I don't know if she's having audio problems, but she just sent me a text. She said she thinks she's on the public side of the meeting.
Okay, I will work to get her added over. Audrey Young.
For.
Becky Huss-Keeler.
For.
Jerlisa McDonald. All right. June Yeatman.
For.
Catherine Abba.
For.
Kirsten Schwab.
For.
Kim Coffrin.
For.
Melissa Hoisington.
For.
Reagan Miller.
For.
Sarah Abrahams.
For.
Stephanie Rubin.
For.
Teresa Robledo.
For.
Carrie Breeden. Travis Armstrong. I saw Travis. Travis, you're on mute if you're talking.
So I think Travis was kind of monitoring two meetings at once. So I think he's here, but multitasking.
Fair. And Weldon Beard.
For.
All right. The motion to approve the minutes has carried. Thank you. And I'll pass it back to you, Reagan.
Great. And actually, I'm going to pass it back to you. So before you help our folks who are having some connection issues or joining the meeting, The next agenda item is public comment. So Megan, can you review this for us?
Yeah, absolutely. So as a reminder to everyone, earlylearningtexas.org has a section called meetings. This houses all the meeting information for 2021, as well as the agenda once it's released. Public agendas for these meetings are posted a minimum of 1 week prior to the meeting date, and they include the Zoom link along with instructions for submitting public comment. We also dropped into the chat the opportunity to do the equivalent of provide the equivalent of oral testimony at the beginning of this meeting. I have received no requests at this point for public comment, so I'll pass it back to you, Reagan.
Okay, great. Thank you very much. Okay, so Megan, if you can check out the chat and see if we've got people who need some help connecting in this Zoom framework. Okay, so our first big agenda item, it's fifth on the agenda, are COVID-19 updates, and we have several updates from state agencies. The first will be from Sarah Abrahams, Deputy Associate Commissioner, Prevention and Early Intervention at DFPS.
Thank you, Reagan. I know there are lots of state agencies, so I'm going to just take a few minutes and highlight some of the specific responses and impact of COVID to the work of prevention and early intervention, and specifically to the work of the community grantees across the state that are providing direct services and community supports to families. Essentially, almost all, 100% of PEI providers were able to pivot to some combination of virtual services during our COVID pandemic over the past year. Many of them are beginning to pivot back to face-to-face and in-person services. And we have made a commitment to continue to support the ongoing flexibility of virtual services as part of our service delivery model, and are working with providers across the state to best identify guidance and guidelines for those virtual services. We found that families really had various levels of engagement and success with virtual services, which is in part why we want them to remain a part of our toolbox, but not our primary method of service delivery. Some of the challenges really included virtual fatigue, a lack of access to consistent internet or data services, and challenges with conducting some of our assessments and intakes virtually. But successes really included the ability to reach families even when schedules and transportation were issues, the ability to include various family members who may not have otherwise been able to participate in some of our prevention and early intervention services, and increased use of inter-visit or between session connection and support with case managers, home visitors, and others, which we think will now become more a part of service as usual. And finally, I just want to highlight that we were able to use some of the funding available through that transition to virtual services, including savings from travel or mileage, to support additional basic needs support for families across the state. And we're able to incorporate that as a way of both maximizing funds and improving resources to families through this difficult time.
All right.
With that, I'll turn it back to you, Reagan.
Thank you, Sarah. And next, Monica Martinez, Director of Standards and Support Services, TEA.
Good morning. So we just also have a couple of quick updates. And what you see on the slide now is just some data that is showing enrollment trends. So you can see that we have listed here students in pre-kindergarten, students in kindergarten, and students in first grade. And that trend from the 2017-18 school year to the current school year, we've seen somewhat of a drop in enrollment for kindergarten and first grade, but a much more significant drop in enrollment when we look at the kindergarten data. So with kindergarten, we're looking at about a 21% drop in enrollment from the 1920 school year to the current school year. At TEA, we have been engaging in conversations and increasing our efforts to provide some support to school districts to help encourage families to enroll. So it is that time of year when we have a lot of outreach taking place, and we are looking at any additional support that we can provide to try to get those numbers, to get that trend line to go back up for the 21-22 school year. The other thing that I would mention, and we will, I think during legislative updates, I'll have a little bit of information that's somewhat related. But in terms of the federal funding that we have received, we really don't have much by way of specific updates yet. As many of you, or if not all of you know, we are fast approaching the end of the legislative session. I just ran over from a Senate Education Committee meeting. And we've got several bills in play that would direct some of the way that the agency would use funding that has not yet gone directly out to school districts. I think in almost all of those cases, those bills would impact starting in pre-kindergarten, several bills that would really emphasize support in pre-K through 5th grade. And then others, it would go up through 12th grade. So we, as many others, are anxiously awaiting the outcome of the legislative session to determine next steps with respect to the way that stimulus funding will be spent. And I think that's all I've got this morning.
All right, thank you for that update. I know that members had questions before about enrollment numbers, so really appreciate this.
May I ask a question?
Yes, Kathy.
I'm just curious about the downward trend in kindergarten enrollment. Now, clearly, I mean, it is COVID related somewhat, but do you think parents just didn't even want to bother with virtual school for their children in kindergarten, so they just didn't enroll regardless of whether it was in person or virtual?
Yeah, I mean, there are probably a number of things going on there. As I'm sure you all know, with kindergarten not being required, that may have an impact on some of the decisions that families made. I think the other thing is, you know, what we definitely recognized is that while virtual has been difficult on all of us, I know even as an adult, I struggle with so many virtual meetings, but it's really, really difficult for our youngest learners. And so as we rolled out options for districts to provide remote instruction, synchronous and asynchronous, there were slightly different options available in the early grades, pre-K, K, and 1, that may have had some impact on some of the choices that families made. So I think there are a number of things. It is interesting that as you go, so pre-K was the most significant, then kindergarten, and then 1st grade. While we did see a drop, it was the least significant of those early grades.
Can I ask one follow-up question, Monica? This is Stephanie.
Yes, ma'am. Yes.
For this last column, what's the date that those data come from? What was the last date that districts would have reported that to TEA for us to end up with that column?
So I'm going to ask Megan for some assistance here. Megan, did we pull this from Snapshot?
Yep, this is from the publicly available PEANS data.
So the snapshot would have been October. So we would be looking at, these numbers would have reflected the situation in the fall. Okay,
so not the beginning of the year where we would expect some enrollment went up, but we don't know.
Right, yeah. So I think snapshot is like mid-October. So that's what this would reflect.
Okay.
All right. Thank
Megan,
you very much. Yes.
Sorry, one more question. Sorry.
Okay. Yes.
And Monica, I know we're pushing out of early childhood, but how do our 1st grade numbers look compared to 2nd, 3rd, and out the rest of elementary? Is that like pretty on par? I'm guessing there's going to be a dip across the board, but just curious.
Yeah, I think we're looking at like I said, the higher we get, it's going to look very similar.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you.
All right. Any other questions? Okay. Thank you very much. And now Travis Duke from HHSC's Early Childhood Intervention Program is going to provide us with an update.
Hi, everybody. I'm Travis Duke. I'm the Associate Director for the ECI program. I'm here representing Dana McGrath, who couldn't make it today. It's good to see everyone. I'll start off with an overview of the ongoing impact of the pandemic on the ECI program by looking at some key metrics and how they've varied throughout the last year. At the height of the pandemic, referrals to ECI were down 43% in April of 2020 and remained on a downward trend of 16% overall in 2020. They showed a 42% increase in March 2021, however, compared to March 2020. So things are looking good. They're looking better. We initially transferred to almost 100% virtual when everything hit, and now many, if our programs are transitioning back to doing some face-to-face, depending on the families, how comfortable the families are. Next slide. The overall child count in Texas was down 2% in 2020 from 2019. It's not huge, but for Texas, it's quite significant because historically our state has had a significant upward growth trend in our caseload for many years. A point in time from March showed a 2% child count decrease in Texas from March of the previous year. So it was much lower, but it's starting to come back up. Next slide. Service hours were down 13% overall in 2020, and are showing an upward trend with a 31% increase in March of 2021 compared to March of last year. So March of 20, the service hours were 58,973, and in March of 21, it was 77,517. So that's also a good thing to see. Next slide. I also wanted to share a little information about the additional funds Texas ECI will be receiving as part of the American Rescue Plan Act, ARP, and which was signed into law in early March 11th, I think. As part of the ARP, $250 million are being made available to the states for IDEA Part C needs, and Texas is currently set to receive a little more than 20 million of those funds. These additional funds will support states to help address the challenges posed by the COVID-19 pandemic and to continue to meet the needs of infants and toddlers with disabilities and their families. We anticipate additional guidance on the ARP funding from the Department of Education very soon, and we'll need to begin making decisions about how to use the funds pretty quickly. And that's all I have right now about COVID-19.
I think you're on mute, Reagan.
All right, thank you. Thank you, Travis. We appreciate you being here and standing in.
Sure.
Can I ask one question on
Sure.
ECI?
Absolutely.
So I think it'd just be helpful for the group. So Travis, the decrease in ECI enrollment during COVID, there's things that are important about why that happened. And there are a couple of things that, relate to, that have to do with the broader landscape, like fewer kids were going to see pediatricians who are referrers, fewer
Right.
kids were going to childcare who are referrers. Where those, could you explain a little bit about what your assessment is about, and obviously people, if they didn't want telehealth or they didn't want folks in their home, that would be a third reason, but what's HHSC's sort of understanding about why the enrollment dropped?
All of the things you mentioned.
Okay.
Yeah, we believe that the referrals dropped significantly. So kids weren't getting referred to the program, so we can't evaluate those kids. And then a lot of families didn't think telehealth was meeting the needs. So those folks sort of faded away to a certain extent. And then, like you said, the schools not being open, things like that. So. That's basically how we've seen it, as what the causes were. But all those numbers are starting to come back up. So because we're doing less telehealth than we were, and we're getting more referrals, and so we anticipate that we'll probably by the end of this year, if things keep going in this direction, we'll be back, in a growth trajectory.
Yeah, and I think it's important. I think the earlier slide that showed kind of in 2021, a pretty steep uptick in people at ECI. Yeah, and so what's important about that, just so people understand, is that, and this is kind of related to the legislative update, is a sort of, a look back. The legislature looked at the enrollment numbers and projections. And so this slide is actually really helpful because there was some differences in those projections from House and Senate. And you can see that enrollment's going up, which is of course really important to budgeting. So thank you for that slide. That's really helpful.
Sure, I'll talk about this a little bit more in our legislative update, but I don't know if you guys seen, but the bill that came out of the Finance Committee adopted the House's numbers, so which is very positive for ECI. So,
Right.
Again, can I ask? I've got one question.
You
Travis,
bet.
is related to the ARPA funding. Two questions and an assumption. I'm assuming it's one-time money similar to the other ARPA dollars.
correct.
So is the timeline similar to the other dollars? Like we've got 3-year, it has to be allocated, and then do we have any idea of what you guys are? I know we're still waiting on guidance. I know it has to go through approval, but big ideas as far as what you guys are thinking that money will go towards.
I'm not quite sure on those specific details. I do know the funds are supposed to be allocated to us at the same time as our normal Part C funds are, so that should be coming to us in July. As far as the length of time that we have to use them, I'm not quite sure. But and as far as how we use them, I anticipate most of the money going into ECI contracts.
Okay. Thanks.
All right. Other questions, comments? If not, I'm going to turn it over to Rochelle Daniel, Director of Regional Operations for Daycare at Child Care Regulation. Rochelle, over to you.
Good morning, everyone. I'm happy to be able to participate today and give you guys some presentation on the child care regulation trends that we're seeing in terms of operations. So what I'm going to look at is kind of this time period of the beginning of January of 20 through the end of beginning of March to kind of show overall trends. I think what you're looking at here is just generally across the board the number of permitted childcare operations. And so this is going to include all of our different operation types, our daycare centers, our licensed homes, our listed homes, and our registered homes. So you can see kind of as a global, we've certainly seen a decrease. I think the total decrease is about 5.5% when you look at all types of populations. The other thing to keep in mind about this data is it is not quite our official data at this point. And it hasn't gone through the sort of the quality assurance process we use when we finalize stuff for our annual data book. But we wanted to be able to give you guys some what we feel is pretty solid data on what the childcare industry looks like as a whole right now. So Megan, yes, thank you. One thing, let me step back and say one thing though, just generally speaking, keep in mind that we had a lot of operations that closed for some period of time during the pandemic, but never officially relinquished their permits. And so I think at the height of the pandemic, we had probably about 20% of our childcare operations that were not operating. But they had not said, I'm not coming back here, take my license. I'm moving on to something else. So just kind of keep that in mind. I think, we certainly have seen fewer available operations throughout the height of the pandemic. But what we're hearing is that most of these are intending to reopen now that things are stabilized. So just wanted to say that piece. So this particular chart is just kind of looking at the comparison of the data across the different types of childcare operations. So you can kind of see, obviously, the childcare centers are our largest number of operations, close to the 10,000 mark. And you can see that there's been a little bit of a decrease. But when you've got 10,000 operations, that decrease doesn't look quite as dramatic. One thing that we also noticed in looking at this data is that for licensed childcare homes, even though they don't make up a significant number of our childcare operation population, they were pretty stable throughout this whole process. And then, we kind of look at our listed family homes and our registered childcare homes, kind of keeping in mind that registered has some restrictions and some requirements in terms of standards we have for them. And listed is really just, largely just a background check until recently. That was really the primary thing that we look at for issuing those listing certificates. But what you can see is that listed family homes have probably taken some of the hardest hit in this data. So, Megan, you want to move on? So what this visual does is sort of break down what I just showed you in the comparative data into individual data sets. Kind of looking at the licensed child care centers, again, the specific volume. We started out in January of 20 with just over 9,700 permitted licensed child care centers, and current data, and we actually were able to pull more current data as of the beginning of this month for this data set, 9,400, almost 9,500. So a decrease of about 200 childcare operations statewide. When you look at that comparatively, that is about a 2.4% total decrease. If you look at the chart on the bottom left-hand corner, that is our licensed childcare homes, and that's the one that I kind of indicated we felt like it was pretty stable throughout. You can see we started in January of last year with, oh my gosh, that font is so tiny. I'm sorry, everybody. In the 16, yeah, almost 1640 range. Thank you, Megan. And, as of right now, we're just a little bit under 1600. Again, because it's a small population to begin with, percentage wise, it was about a 2.6% reduction, but overall pretty stable. In the top right-hand corner, that is our registered childcare homes. And this population, we had about 3,100 before the height of the pandemic, and we are now down to 2,800. So that's about a 10% reduction in that overall population. And then when you jump down to the bottom right-hand corner, that is our listed family homes. And again, kind of keeping in mind that this is our sort of least restrictive population. Historically has had a lot of fluidity in terms of people coming into the program, perhaps to be relative caregivers for specific children receiving subsidies through TWC. But historically, it's been a little bit of a lot of turnover and turmoil in this group. But certainly this period has been difficult for them. So started out at about 2,800, currently around 2,400. And so that's about a 13.5% decrease. So that population has certainly faced some challenges. And then we can move on to the next slide, Megan. This data is looking at some moment in time information of the number of operations that closed permanently during each of the months of this period. So one thing to keep in mind with this data is that, the act of maybe a childcare operation getting a new ownership, or the act of moving locations can result in a closure technically. And so those situations show up here, but that does not always mean that we've lost capacity for the childcare industry. So just again, kind of keeping that in mind, some of these that look like there are lots of closures, we've actually recovered and added new operations as a result of that. So this data is kind of all over the place, in my opinion. I don't see any consistencies. We actually, in January of 20, we closed more operations than in that month than we've closed in any month since. I can't say for sure what that trend is about or what that situation is. I will, the only identifier that I can kind of put into some of the data later in this chart is that starting in January of 21, we had a concerted effort of working with our childcare providers that had been temporarily closed to make some decisions regarding what is your intention. Do you intend to reopen? Or for the foreseeable future, are you saying I can't? It's not a viable option for us any longer. So starting in January, we kind of pushed those conversations with some of our providers. And that's where we saw the count of closures go back up a little bit in January as people recognized that, no, I don't think I'm going to be able to recover from this. So that's just food for thought.
Michelle, can I ask you a question about that?
Absolutely.
So is it, do you have any data that kind of crosses with TEA maybe to show, because there are actually a lot of kids that went back to school by the beginning of the year. So I wonder are there certain age groups, childcare centers serving certain age groups that maybe were more likely to close the beginning of the year than others, maybe associated with school enrollment or going back into the classroom and campuses. Just wondering whether.
I'm sure we could get some data around that. I don't know that we've been consistently pulling anything with those metrics. I think it'd be interesting, and I do think it's something we could look at. Absolutely.
Dana, I'm with TEA. I'm representing Terry for this meeting. She had multiple meetings. The Texas Education Agency has their October 31st snapshot, but they're also required to collect data on student enrollment in the summer PEIMS collection. So that might be specific data that would help look at the number of students who have enrolled since January and the beginning of the year to see those increases. I think that's what you were kind of getting at. Correct me if I'm wrong.
Yes. Yeah.
And I guess, so Stephanie, you were asking about kind of age ranges. Rochelle, can you clarify? Because I thought that what age range information do you collect when a program receives a permit?
We just look at what age ranges are they approved for. So are they approved for infants and toddlers? Are they approved for, sorry, I'm gonna draw a blank on, 3 to 5, or they approved for school age children.
But we don't really know like the number of classrooms that they have dedicated to that, just that you've approved them to serve that age of child.
Correct. Yeah, thank you for clarifying that, Reagan. Yeah, so does that answer questions?
Yeah, and oh yeah, Kim, go ahead.
Go ahead. I was just going to get off the age groups and move on. So Reagan, if you have something about the age groups, go ahead.
So I have something else, but you go first.
Okay. So Rochelle, obviously we've got January, February, and March of 2020, and March was kind of that half pandemic, half not pandemic month. How do these numbers across the year compare to, when we add up the year from March to March, how do those compare to any other given year of closures?
And I would have to go look at our data book to pull that information. I certainly can look that up as we're talking and see if I can circle back and get you that information, but I don't know it off the top of my head.
Right, because you would assume like those closures, those closures due to moving or closures due to selling are going to be somewhat consistent from year to year. So that would help us tease out how many of them actually were COVID related.
Right. And I think that's a valid assumption that generally speaking, it's going to be consistent. I do think what we have seen anecdotally is that we have a lot of operations that sold to conglomerates because they couldn't afford as a small business to continue operating. So I think we may even see some increases in those sorts of changes for this period. But relevant.
It is very interesting that there is not a consistent trend, that it is all over the map every month. And I think that just goes to show of providers trying to hang on and try to make it, and then just getting to the point where they weren't able to.
Right. I think the other thing we saw is kind of where you see that spike in September of 20. Again, this is all anecdotal, so keep that in mind. But I think a lot of providers were holding on until school started.
School starts, yep. And same thing in January, right?
Yeah.
So,
yep. So, yeah, it's like, okay, if I can make it until school starts, things return to normal, I'm going to be okay. And then kind of recognizing, nope, school's still not quite like it was going to be. So we need to revisit our decision. So that's
oh, sorry, one more question. I know we don't have the numbers per age group, but do we have the numbers, or can we get the numbers of how many of these programs? So not only the total number for the year, but then how many spots we lost? I know we don't have enrollment numbers, but we do have capacity numbers, right?
We do. And I think, Reagan, this is where we might need to collaborate a little bit, because I think we've talked about some of the data that comes over to us is not always in line with what you know to be true in your system, if I'm saying that correctly.
Yeah, it's interesting. We've had a lot of discussions about this data and how we look at this data. And if you look at it on a snapshot in time, one day in time, the numbers are very different than if you look at it over a month in time. So I just want to warn everybody that as you look at data, you just have to be really careful, because we started trying to compare, what are we looking at?
But even broadening the lens even through for the year, like what did, on a normal year, what do we typically, what kind of fluctuation do we see? And then what did the COVID year really do to our industry? From the number of providers to the number of slots for children.
Yeah, absolutely. Good data. Thank you, Megan, for moving forward for me. And again, so that previous chart was to look at the industry as a whole, how many closed in each given month. This is breaking it down by operation type. And again, the thing that stands out for me in this data is when you look at the listed family homes, that is by far our smallest number of providers. They are also by far the ones in general that were closing at the highest rate.
And Rochelle, can I weigh in on something on that? So as people are looking at this, listed family homes obviously is something that child care regulation follows closely. On the TWC side, listed family homes are only used for relative care. Relative care, the children in relative care are less than 0.5%. And so this data is very important from the permitting side. From the subsidy side, we have, it's almost a rounding error in the number of kids that are placed in relative care, which is listed. So,
yeah. And I think that is a very important distinction when we're talking about the funding streams and things like that, and those kids that are not being served through those dollars. But I think when you look at the bigger childcare industry and early childhood as a whole, there are lots of families that are utilizing listed family homes that are not eligible or not receiving subsidies. So, again, I think it's just kind of, it's a different side of the coin, but we certainly have seen family child caregivers suffer the greatest.
Reagan, are registered child care homes eligible for subsidies?
Yes. All of the others are eligible. Just on the listed home side, that's only for relative care.
Okay.
And I'll go through some numbers on our side as well.
Great. And so then, Megan, I think we have, is this my last slide? I think it is, yes. And so this one is just breaking it down a little bit further, individual spreadsheets, or I'm sorry, graphs of how many of each operation type close in each month. And this way you can actually see the numbers. The other data was kind of harder to see the numbers. But, just kind of point out again that our licensed childcare homes, while they don't make up a huge population, they were very stable overall. during this 14-month period. So,
Michelle, can I ask one more question? I don't.
absolutely.
Did you notice any regional trends in terms of where if some of the childcare deserts got a little worse, if these are clustered in any particular parts of the state where the closures happen?
I think we've looked at anecdotally. Like I said, I don't have any specific numbers to show to you guys today. But I know that El Paso area was really hard hit, and they actually have a lot of childcare operations. That's our highest percentage that have yet to reopen even from temporary closures. So, you know, across the state, we're in the mostly the 92% and higher of operations that have reopened from those temporary closures. And I think the El Paso area, we're still seeing under 90% of operations reopened. So that's just the most anecdotal information. But again, I think there's data out there that we can point you guys to. I think we also had this really great trend data that we plugged onto our website, and I meant to include the link on here. I can send it in the chat if you guys are interested, where it kind of is looking at this sort of opening and closure data across each month, and some of the trends of new applications, or sort of that churn, to kind of look at what is the end result in a given month.
Well, that would be interesting, because I know that was one of my last questions for you, was how are applications coming in for new permits? Are we seeing, you know, are people still wanting to get into childcare, or are they, oh, heck no? So
yeah, I mean,
where's that trends?
I certainly think we were definitely getting new applications. And I think that we are also, we're still closing them, right? And so I don't think we're balancing out just yet. I think we're getting better.
We're losing more than we're gaining.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, still at this point. Do I foresee that changing in the coming months now that, you know, we do feel more stabilized in the health crisis? Absolutely. And just kind of as a side note, we also have our unregulated operations unit, who is, you know, they're charged with investigating childcare operations that may be operating without a permit, that should have a permit. And so really trying to bring those new people into the fold. If what they're providing is legitimate childcare, then we want to help them become registered, listed, or licensed. And so hopefully that sort of push will help to kind of start offsetting some of these numbers. So
thank you.
Yeah, that's my data. Any other questions?
Thank you, Rochelle.
Thank you, guys.
All right. Thank you, Rochelle. Okay, and with that, I'm going to close this portion with some updates from TWC. So the first thing I'm going to start off with are some of the charts with some data, and I just want to highlight all of this is posted on our Child Care by the Numbers webpage. And interestingly, so what you're going to see is data through December of 20. This morning, we updated the webpage, and we now have information through March. So I'll provide some narrative updates about the data through March, but just know that you can go on our webpage, you can find more recent data. We look by month and we look by year. All of this, we're going to give you like the past, I think it's 15 months worth of data, but if you're interested in looking back historically, we go all the way back to 2015. Okay, so with that, the first chart is average number of kids served per day. So as you look at this chart, you can clearly see that as the pandemic hit, we had a big decline in the number of total kids being served. That black line is the percent of kids that are enrolled in Texas Rising Star. And you're gonna, you know, we've talked a lot about how Texas Rising Star providers fared better. You can actually see that as we had the number of total kids declining, we're actually seeing an increase in the percent of kids that are enrolled in Texas Rising Star. So while there's bad news, at least we're seeing that the kids in Texas Rising Star are staying level, and as a percent are increasing. So Megan, if you'll go to the next slide. We've also been asked a lot about the ages of the kids that we serve. And a lot of this has come up as we've been talking about the expansion of pre-K. And lots of folks have been worried about the impact on preschool children enrolled in subsidy and in all childcare programs. So let me just tell you that we're not really seeing any big shifts in the age ranges right now. Infants are staying, well, it was about 7% based on this data through December, and it increased to about 8% based on the most recent 3 months. So staying relatively stable. Same with toddlers, about 18%, preschool, roughly 39%, and school age, about 35, 34%. So we're not seeing big swings in the age ranges of kids that we're serving. And even, when you look back historically, we don't have really wide swings in the distribution of the age ranges. And so then the last chart that we have, this is the number of subsidy providers. So pre-pandemic, we hovered around 6,300 providers in any given month. We're serving one or more subsidy referred kids. The vast majority of parents elect to serve their kids in childcare centers. So if you actually look at the distribution of like provider type, it's like 98% of kids are in centers. And if you look at the centers and at our kind of market penetration, generally speaking, we've got somewhere around 45% of all regulated providers serving one or more kids. But if you just hone in on childcare centers, it's closer to 60%, which is really important since that's where most of our kids elect to send their kids. So as I said, pre-pandemic, we were hovering around 6,300. Mid-pandemic in June, you'll see that drop to about 5,300. And we're continuing to see steady increases month over month. In March, we were just over 5,900 providers in any month serving one or more kids. And once again, you see that Texas Rising Star line and that general increase as a relative percent throughout this period. So we're seeing a bigger impact on providers who were non-TRS than are TRS. So this is like I said, there's a lot more of this data online. You can look at this at the statewide level. You can look at it at the board level. So you can look area by area to see what the impacts have been. So encourage you to take a look at that. And if you have any questions, you can always let us know. So with that, from a COVID-19 perspective, an update on the stimulus funding. I think everybody knows we've received quite a significant increase of one-time funds, 1.1 billion in discretionary SRSA funds, 1.5 billion in 1.7 billion in discretionary ARPA funds, and then 2.7 billion in ARPA stabilization funds. On May 4th, our three commissioners did approve the use of 790 million of that 1.1 billion, with 775 million of that going out in relief funds to all regulated childcare programs. And then 15 million of that is going to support business coaching and technical assistance. So that'll leave us with all of the ARPA funds still available and about 300 million in the SRSA funds available. So any questions on this stimulus funding? All right.
I have a question.
Hi, Jolita. Yes.
Hey, Reagan. This is Jolita McDonald with ADFW Childcare.
And I always appreciate the members saying their name before they speak so that folks who are listening know. Good to see you.
It's good to see you too. So has TWC came up with a way of how the funding would be distributed to providers in the state of Texas?
So are you asking about the dollar amount or the mechanics for actually distributing it, or both?
Both.
So yes, in the PowerPoint that you received, you'll see where it says the TWC commissioners approved, and there's an underline. That is a hyperlink that will take you to the document that we presented to our commissioners. And in that document, we highlight the methodology that was used to distribute the funds. It was based on the provider type, so licensed center, licensed home, registered home, and it was based on the market rate at the 75th percentile for where that provider is located. We also included enhanced amounts, so that gets you the base amount. We also included enhanced amounts if you are Texas Rising Star, and an enhanced amount if you, or nationally accredited, and an enhanced amount if you live in a childcare desert. And childcare desert was added to the state statute last session regarding contracted slots. So they defined that as an area of the state where the number of kids less than 6 with working parents is at least 3 times greater than the license capacity. So we were able to get some census data. The census data that we could get at the most granular level looked at the zip code areas. And so we were able to use that, compare it to childcare regulations data, and then identify which areas qualified as childcare deserts. For the TRS enhanced rate, we looked in general across the state at how much more providers receive at each of the star levels, and we used that relative difference. So the 2-star enhancement is 13%, the 3-star enhancement is 25%, and the 4-star enhancement is 38%. We are developing a calculator that we'll post online so folks can actually enter their information, and you can see how that calculates out. In the paper, we also included an attachment that has some sample grant amounts. These are very, very much samples because they aggregate all of the TRS rates, but it gives you an idea of how much providers of certain capacity might expect to see. So you can also look there. And then as far as the distribution, we are developing an online system, and we are going to email all regulated providers in the state. We have been working with childcare regulation to get a list of all providers that were open as of May 1st. And with that information, we will email out the providers so that they can access this system. Does that help?
Yes, it does help. I have one more question, and this is from some providers in the North Texas area. So they have a question about the TIN number. What is a TIN number, and how can they go about obtaining one, or what is the direction for one?
Yeah, so TIN is Texas Identification Number, and that's a requirement. Anybody receiving government funds has to have a TIN number. The state comptroller is responsible for assigning TIN numbers to everybody in Texas. Because of the huge volume, I mean, we're looking at 14,000 grants. That's huge. We are automating the process to assign TIN numbers through this online application. So that, I mean, the comptroller, it would have taken them months to manually assign TIN numbers, 14,000 TIN numbers. So we've set up an automated process so that if you don't have a TIN number already, when you apply, we're going to do an automated interface with the comptroller, so providers will automatically get their number.
Thank you so much for answering our questions. I appreciate it.
Absolutely, absolutely. Okay, other questions on this update? And I think, can somebody read me the question that just popped up? Megan, can you read that to me?
No questions. I think folks are just posting links to some of the documents that are being referred to.
Oh, good. I'm sorry.
So,
I thought I saw a question from it came up and it went away pretty quickly, but I couldn't tell if Weldon had a question about Head Start providers.
Reagan, I have a question. This is Stephanie Rubin.
Yes.
Of all the many, many great things you and TWC did during COVID to try to be flexible and provide some, stimulus money to providers and so forth, what do you feel like ended up having the most impact of the many things you tried? Or how do you think about how you would measure that for yourself?
Yeah, I mean, first of all, I think if you compare subsidy providers and just in general to the childcare regulation data, I think you can see that subsidy providers have generally fared better than those who weren't serving subsidized referrals. Anecdotally, I've had providers tell us that they weren't subsidy before, but they actually became part of the system, seeing this kind of support that was available. I mean, and I think it's really hard to pinpoint one thing. Certainly that enhanced reimbursement rate, when the numbers of kids enrolled dropped so significantly, I think was clearly a big benefit. I think as that enhanced reimbursement rate phases out, it's phasing out at the same time that this $775 million is now going out to providers. So while one kind of enhanced rate declined, we have another strategy to be able to help providers. And this $775 million is sort of like the first down payment on ongoing stabilization funds through ARPA with that $2.7 billion. So I certainly think that those large influx of cash to a program have been incredibly helpful. But I also think thinking about kind of on the parent side, and it helps providers too, those policy changes that we put in place to provide folks with a longer period to receive childcare if they had lost their job, to allow extended. So we pay based on referrals. So I'm going to say that one more time because a lot of people have been recommending that we pay based on referrals, and we do. If a child is referred, we pay for a month of childcare. We do count absences, but even if a child is absent, that provider is getting paid for the full month that they are referred. Generally, we count 40 absences, and at that point, we'll talk to the parent to determine, should childcare continue because you don't seem to be using that childcare benefit. So we pay based on referral until a child hits 40 absences. Beginning of COVID, we knew that kids were going in and out, and so we waived that 40 absence for quite a long period of time. So I think that also had some effect. So I guess it's really hard for me to say it was one thing. I think it was kind of, melding all of these different strategies together. But I'd be really interested for the childcare folks that are on the call, what do you think helped the most?
I'm assuming, Reagan, you're directing that at me.
Well, or childcare providers. I mean, I just say, we had a lot of these strategies on the subsidy side, and
I mean, I think your assumption feels really legitimate to me in terms of those supports that were provided being really key to allowing childcare operations to remain open long term. I cannot disagree with the at least what the optics look like there.
Yeah.
So Reagan, in terms of the enhanced reimbursement rate, which you can continue to support with the additional funds from stimulus and relief, at what point, remind us again when that funding will be spent, in which case we'll be at that kind of tough cliff where and unless there's some other option, they'll go back down, and just, everyone need to think about the implications of that.
So right now we are in the phasing out process. So we paid 25% through March. In April, it was 20, and in May, it's 15. In June, it's 10, in July, it's 5%. So I think what's helpful is that this 775 million is about to be infused to all childcare providers at the time that this enhanced rate is declining. And then the next step for us will be to look at that 2.7 billion in stabilization grants that was just released through ARPA. 90% of that 2.7 billion will go out, it's required to go out in grants to providers. We have this existing online application system that can serve as the foundation for the distribution of those funds. Just this week, or at the end of last week, the Federal Administration for Children and Families Office of Child Care just released some additional information to states about what they need to consider as they implement stabilization funds. So as soon as we can get this pot of money out, then we'll certainly be turning our attention to how do we set up a program to administer 2.7 billion in grant, or 90% of 2.7 billion, whatever that is, in grants to providers as well. And I think both of those are going to provide, while it's not an enhanced reimbursement rate for subsidy providers, this is actually money that will be provided to all regulated childcare. And so it has a broader level of support across the industry.
Yeah, I guess it's just the issue of kind of planning and sustainability, right? The enhanced reimbursement rate has that benefit. And I guess for certain programs, it would be money that would be greater than whatever the stabilization grant, will turn out to be. So it's just something, I know that you'll be tracking that data, and it'd be interesting to get information from childcare about the benefits of one versus the other, and sort of what will happen when the both funding sources, either the enhanced rate or this other infusion, disappears, and then we're kind of left with a drop in financial support for childcare providers. I mean, it's a concern for the future, I think.
Yeah, and I think certainly we've been looking at, as this enhanced rate winds down, the hope has been, the whole reason for the enhanced rate was this recognition that most providers were at like 50% of total capacity. They just weren't collecting as much revenue, and they still had all these bills to pay. Your rent, your insurance, none of those went away. With any luck, as we start getting into next school year, and things hopefully are getting back to normal, or whatever the new normal is, we are going to see overall enrollment numbers increase. And that's absolutely something that we're keeping an eye on. I'll say once again, we have that online availability portal that we made available that childcare programs can voluntarily use to indicate how many spaces they have available by age range. Parents can use it to find childcare, and it links back to childcare regulations database, so they can also link up and see all of those past 5 years of inspection reports. Another feature of that availability portal, again, it's all optional for providers, is for them to enter their enrollment numbers. So we can actually compare their license capacity to the enrollment numbers that they are reporting in the availability portal. And that really helps us better understand overall, how is the industry doing in total? Are we seeing overall increases in the number of kids versus how many they could serve?
Mm-hmm.
So we encourage all of you to remind folks to use this system, to voluntarily report and to voluntarily enter that enrollment information, because it really is helpful to us as we consider these kind of policy implications of the pandemic.
I have a question. This is June Yateman, and I am on the council representing the early childhood workforce. And I'm just curious about, do we have numbers, and probably we do, and I just don't know where to look for them, about programs that serve families who are eligible for subsidized care versus numbers of families who have children in child care and they're not eligible for subsidized care.
So there is some national data on the number of children who are eligible for subsidy and then what % of those kids are actually being served in the state. CLASP put out a report that looked at this for all states, and it actually looked at, based on the federal eligibility requirement and based on state eligibility requirements, because oftentimes states lower the income threshold that's allowed federally. We will find a copy of that report and we'll have Megan send it out to all members so you guys can take a look at that.
Thank you very much, Reagan. I appreciate that.
Absolutely.
Hello, Reagan. This is Weldon Beard, representing the Texas Head Start Association. Now, I did have a couple questions. Are Head Start programs or licensed childcare facilities eligible for this funding?
Yes, if they are licensed and permitted by childcare regulation, then they would be.
Okay. And a follow-up question, because a lot of Head Start programs, especially in the rural areas, are looking to try to do extended day childcare. Are they eligible for the childcare subsidies?
Are they permitted by childcare regulation?
Yes.
So yeah, anybody who is permitted by childcare regulation is eligible.
Okay. Okay. Thank you.
Yes, you bet. All right, any other questions on this slide? Okay. I think that's our last slide for this agenda item, and we will now move on to agenda item 6, legislative updates. So our state agency council members are going to provide an update, and then we'll open it up. Would love to hear if any other members have updates that they would like to provide. So we will start with DFPS. Sarah, can you give us an update?
Yes, and again, I'll be brief because I think ours are the updates involving prevention and early intervention, at least at this point, are fairly few. And I think others of our state agencies have more complex legislation in front of them. But I've listed a few here that I just want to highlight as bills that we think will impact PEI directly. The first is really related to allowing pregnant and parenting minors the authority to accept and approve services for them and their own minor children. The second is a bill related to provision of services specifically around the utilization of Families First Prevention Services Act funding. And where this really intersects with prevention and early intervention is around the proposed funding to create family preservation service pilots. And I believe actually this bill, since I sent this to Megan, is in motion. So, and likely to be approved. The next one is really connected to our ability to expand or clarify the statutory requirements around evidence-based programming. And I think there is still some discussion about this, but may not move in quite the way that it was originally proposed. And then the final one is really about creating some competitive grant opportunities to support nurse home visiting programs, especially ones that are focused on a more short-term intervention. Family Connects is a model that is currently in use in Texas that fits some of the criteria of the way that this bill is set out. So would allow us to continue to expand that work.
All right. DSHS, is Audrey on the call?
Yes, I'm here, but it looks like TEA is next on the slide.
Oh,
and for clarity,
they...
Audrey had one bill, but it's no longer moving, so we pulled that out.
Yes.
Oh,
I'm
okay. Sorry, Audrey.
No worries.
The end of session is coming and things are falling by the wayside.
So
Okay,
fast.
so TEA, yes. TEA updates, Monica?
Thanks, Reagan. Yeah, so we have several bills. These are not all specific to pre-K or early childhood, but we thought they might be of interest to this group. The first one, or the first two, are House Bill 41 and its companion Senate Bill 2081. This is a concept that we have seen many sessions now, but both of these bills would add pre-kindergarten to the existing limit in class size limit in statute. So kindergarten through fourth grade classrooms have a limit of 22 students, but pre-K is not included. If either one of these bills passes, then that class size limit would be applicable to pre-K as well. Both of these bills did start out addressing the ratio, but they have both been simplified to just address the class size limit. The next bill, House Bill 725, is actually now enrolled. So unless it's vetoed by the governor, what this bill would do is add what we believe is a pretty small group of students to the list of students who are eligible for pre-K. So currently students in foster care are eligible for pre-K in Texas. The language in statute specifies students who are under the conservatorship of DFPS. It is my understanding that there have been some instances where a student might be in foster care under the conservatorship of a different state, but the child is living in Texas. And so this would allow, for example, maybe a student was in foster care in New Mexico, is now living in El Paso in Texas, then those students would be eligible for free pre-kindergarten. The next couple of bills, House Bill 3557 and Senate Bill 1697, are applicable to all grade levels. But I did want to make sure to point this one out to folks. What this would do is would give parents the option to elect to have their child repeat a grade level. And so in the early grades, what that means is, and if we think back to the trend in enrollment chart that we talked about earlier, if a family did not enroll a child in pre-K this year, but the child was eligible, that family could elect to enroll that child in pre-kindergarten in the upcoming school year. So a 4-year-old this year who may be 5, if a family felt like that student would be best served by going to pre-K as opposed to kindergarten, that would be an option available to families. It does allow children to repeat as well. So if they were enrolled in pre-K and a family wanted the child to repeat pre-K or repeat kindergarten, that would be an option. And that's something that will be an ongoing option through elementary school. It is a short-term option for students at the secondary grade levels. The next couple of bills are related to a reference I made earlier in terms of us waiting to see some direction on federal funding. So House Bill 4545 includes a lot of different elements. We are restructuring some of the accelerated instruction for students. This bill really focuses on trying to address the COVID slide that we know is going to be a really important piece for us to focus on next school year. But the part that I wanted to specifically mention to this group is that the bill does include a Strong Foundations grant program. That program would be applicable to kindergarten through 5th grade. And it would provide districts with grant funding to support high quality instructional materials, professional development, and some other resources that we will be making available specifically to try to address the learning loss that we know many students are experiencing. And then the last bill, House Bill 4465, is one of those bills that is specifically targeted at grants. It would create an opportunity for relief funds in the event of future disasters. I'm hopeful that we won't have any pandemics anytime soon, or other disasters, but in the event that there are, then this would allow for some funding to support school districts, charter schools, and our regional education service centers, depending on the nature of the disaster. So those are a few bills that are still alive and well, either standalone or as amendments to other bills. There's a Senate bill that was just, I think we haven't heard it yet. We will hear it later today. Or I'm sorry, the House Bill 4545 is the one that the Senate's going to hear later today. So we do think that all of these stand a reasonable chance of making it to the finish line.
All right. Thank you very much. Next update is from Travis, ECI.
Yeah, hi, everyone. As I sort of mentioned earlier, probably one of the biggest bills that we were keeping our eyes on was the actual budget bill. There were, between the House version and Senate version, there were quite significant differences. The House version had the appropriation for ECI at 168.9 million for fiscal year 22 and 170.1 million for fiscal year 2023, while the Senate version had 156.3 million appropriated for fiscal year 22 and 158.5 million for fiscal year 23. So you can see quite a bit of a difference in the funding that we would receive depending on the version. However, as I mentioned earlier, we did find out that the version that the bill that came out of committee had the House numbers. So we were very pleased about that. And as in comparison, our current appropriation is 171.9 million. So the 168.9 and the 170.1 are much closer to what our current funding levels are. So barring any unforeseen changes between now and when they get this, the governor signs, hopefully those numbers will stick. The legislature also considered a number of bills this session related to telehealth that are very important to us, including ones highlighted on the slide that would make it easier to deliver services via telehealth and to ensure reimbursement for those services delivered via telehealth. While all ECI providers shifted to a telehealth model during the pandemic, a number of providers were delivering some services via telehealth even before the pandemic and will continue to do so afterwards. So these bills will be very important to help support telehealth service delivery in Texas. And it'll be a huge benefit to ECI if they're passed. I can go into a little detail about HB4 if you like. It requires Medicaid managed care organizations to reimburse therapy services provided via telehealth. Under the current Medicaid policy, some but not all ECI services are reimbursed when provided via telehealth. Currently, MCOs can determine the clinical appropriateness of some telehealth services. This bill allows the service provider to determine whether telehealth is appropriate for a particular service for a child. And HB 1903 allows occupational therapists from other states in the compact to provide services in Texas, including via telehealth. So it will provide flexibilities for ECI contractors and their hiring abilities. So we're excited about that one too. And these are both engrossed as of now, as far as I know.
All right. Questions? If not, I'm going to turn it over to Rochelle for an update.
Thank you, Reagan. So I'm going to talk about just a couple of bills. Senate Bill 225, which is, when I last looked, it was engrossed and had a hearing on the House side last week. So we foresee that this will be voted out and moved along in the process. You'll hear this one probably referred to as Ellie's Law. We actually have a parent whose child passed away in regulated care and has been pushing through these changes with her local senator. And so this one will have a multitude of impacts to childcare regulation. I think it proposes to offer some greater transparency for parents and consumers when we are talking about operations that have been involuntarily suspended and ones that we've revoked their permits. And so just making it a little more clear for those childcare operations that maybe when I was talking about the data earlier, where maybe it was a change in location, not different owners or anything different other than moving location, ensuring that history remains with the same permit holder rather than creating a new history. So I don't know if that's if I made any sense with that, but kind of tying that history together in ways that it currently isn't. It also proposes to add some standards for all home-based providers related to auditory and visual awareness at all times for infants that are in tummy time. Really specific. I think right now the standards around this are very they're not specific to tummy time, but it just basically says you need to have appropriate auditory and visual awareness of children at all times. And it's pretty nebulous. So this will provide a little bit more clarity if it makes it through. It also requires that CCR look at 5 years of operations compliance history when we are renewing or reviewing a license. So right now we currently look at 2 years for most regulatory decisions, and this would require us to look back 5 years. So there's some interesting stuff there. The other one I have listed here is House Bill 1676, and this is surrounding child water safety requirements. I think the biggest impact to childcare operations and early learning environments would be for those that do allow their children to participate in water activities. Every organization, again, this does not just apply to childcare operations, but every organization would have to have a parent sign a form that identifies the child's risk of drowning. So basically whether or not they're a swimmer or not. And if they are not a swimmer or there is risk of drowning because of very few swimming skills, they must wear an approved flotation device at all times during water activities. And I think there's some limits on if it's 2 feet or more of water. So that'll be it would definitely increase child safety surrounding water. One thing I just thought of when Sarah was talking earlier that I didn't include on the list, but I think is of interest to the child and early learning community is House Bill 3379. And this one is relating to the duty to report child abuse and neglect. While this does not necessarily impact childcare regulation directly, what it does is it adds some language that a reporter, those mandated and those that choose to report because they feel like it's the right thing to do, they must have reasonable cause to believe that any physical or any abusive or neglectful situations has an adverse effect on the physical health, mental health, or welfare of the child in question. So it's not just, yes, I have reason to believe that abuse or neglect is occurring. It adds a threshold of that there's reasonable cause to think that abuse or neglect is also adversely affecting the child. I'd like to believe in most situations there should be one and the same, but it certainly it will leave some room for interpretation. So that's all I got, unless anybody has any questions.
Thank you, Rochelle, and thanks for adding that on. I hadn't heard about that legislation. That is interesting. Okay, so let me close out and then I'll turn it over to other council members. Senate Bill 1555. This has already been signed by the governor. This bill modifies the age ranges that we use to reimburse childcare programs. Right now we have 4 age ranges: infant, toddler, pre-K school age. And as an example, in our pre-K age range, we include 3-year-olds, 4-year-olds, and 5-year-olds. And when we develop the reimbursement rate, it's a blended rate based upon all 3 age ranges. But as we all know, childcare regulation has more discrete age ranges with different ratios. And so this legislation will ask us to use those childcare regulation, age ranges, teacher-child ratios in setting our reimbursement rates. Now, this has a very long implementation time frame because we have to make changes to the market rate survey that we conduct so that we can get the market rates for these more discrete age ranges. We are also in the process, we have requested a capital budget item for a new childcare case management IT system. So while the market rate survey is being conducted, and assuming that this capital budget item gets approved, which it looks like it will, we would plan on rolling this out when we launch that new IT system that gives us time to get all of this data collection in place. So this one is a longer range implementation. The bill also asks us to look right now at strategies that we could consider to help Texas Rising Star 3 and 4-star providers with addressing the higher costs of serving infants and toddlers. So again, that one has been signed by the governor. The next one, House Bill 1792. This came out of the Texas Rising Star Work Group that we just acted on their recommendations. And this will centralize how Texas Rising Star assessors are employed. Right now, they're employed by all 28 boards. This legislation will have TWC competitively procure for an entity to employ all Texas Rising Star assessors. This one has passed both the House and the Senate, but still has a few more steps to go through. I put this one on here. It actually affects many different programs. Senate Bill 1138 is asking the Legislative Budget Board to study public safety net programs and look at opportunities to streamline eligibility, reduce costs, eliminate duplication, improve outcomes. And there are a lot of different programs that are covered on here. It has also passed both the Senate and the House. So I'm sure many of us will be participating in that. And then on the last page, we have House Bill 619 and House Bill 2607. Both of these have passed the House and were heard in Senate committee yesterday. So they're both still pending in the committee. So we're waiting to see what the next steps are for these. House Bill 619 would direct us to develop a strategic plan to support the child care workforce. So this would be looking holistically at the child care industry and the workforce within that industry. It also asks us to establish a work group to help as the plan is being developed. And then House Bill 2607, that caption is just so general, you probably wouldn't know what it does. So I'll tell you. It creates, this is a big one. This one basically makes Texas Rising Star mandatory. Right now, Texas Rising Star is a voluntary program. What this would do is create an entry level into Texas Rising Star that all subsidy providers would be required to meet. This entry level does not come with an enhanced reimbursement rate. So it's kind of the entry point into TRS. And then it asks TWC to develop procedures for how long somebody could stay at that entry level before they have to reach at least a 2-star status. There are also some provisions in there that support pre-K partnerships. It also includes a provision that would allow child care providers with contracted slots to refer children to the board to fill any contracted slot vacancies. So we are keeping an eye on both of those. And then Kim, I see that you just commented that they passed out of committee, but when I looked at TLO just a second ago.
Yeah, TLO, I just looked too. TLO is not updated, but Mandy and Jason were both in the hearing this morning and they both passed unanimously. So. All right, there you go. Breaking news. So, breaking news. Very exciting after a very long day yesterday. Yes. Okay, so those are updates from agencies, and I think Stephanie has an update for us.
Hi, of course I have an update. So this is Stephanie Rubin from Texans Care for Children. First of all, for all these bills, a big thanks to, agency staff for, being very helpful with clarifying information and good resources, and then to all the advocates and stakeholders and community people all over the state who've informed the policies and spoken up. And it's obviously a difficult year to show your support in the Capitol, but people have been doing that really, really well. I was gonna start with the fact that there's a new Texas Early Childhood Caucus in the House that just formed officially in the fall, and then membership and leadership was they identified themselves, towards the beginning-ish of session. And so it is a thing. It's filed. There is some staff. There are leaders. That's the website. The chair is Diego Bernal. The vice chair is Angie Chambutton. The treasurer, if I have this correctly, is James Tallarico, and the secretary is Julie Johnson. So it's bipartisan leadership and it's bipartisan membership. They haven't, if you look on the website, you'll see what the, goal and vision and so forth are. I think the hope is that they will be, seeking information and getting data and asking questions of agencies and others, and hopefully when it's, safer to do so, go visit programs. And I think they all see themselves as creating a learning community, and with the goal of looking at young children's issues across the various policy areas, getting outside of just looking at childcare or just looking at pre-K, really the many things that affect early childhood success. So a lot of us are really excited about that. And I think, there probably are going to be some good opportunities, maybe even for the council to share the strategic plan that we have, and try to find some alignment with the caucus members as they think about what they can do as lawmakers. So that's the first thing. The second thing, I think I put in the chat the link, bilingualtexas.org, and or maybe I just put the policy document that outlines some of the bills that are moving around young English learners that David Fagan on our team, I think he talked about the last meeting, but those kind of cross TEA, TWC and HHSC, I think, are probably more TWC, and some of them have a higher ed component. Like one is to create a certification for bilingual special ed, because it was identified that there really is, not enough bilingual special ed teachers for young kids. So those bills have gotten a lot of attention, and I think they're passing well. It's just a question of the clock at this point, as with a lot of things. I wanted to mention, kind of back to the pre-K class size bill, that actually, I'm such an early childhood geek that I looked up and found that the first bill to create a pre-K class size was in 1991. So that's how long, many of you and others have been paying attention to this issue in Texas. It also exempts charters because there is no class size. The state statute on class size for any grade does not apply to charters. So just so people understand, it's for districts and it's just class size, it's not ratio. On Travis's point about ECI, I think that even though what happened was really the prevention of a cut to ECI, it is about a $24 million big deal for ECI providers. So that's actually a really big win for ECI program and for providers and families. And that hinged on this question, which he highlighted in the data, of what the enrollment is likely to be in the future. If we just looked at the COVID numbers and assumed that that would be what the enrollment trend would continue to be, that was more the Senate side, that was going to underfund the program. If as the House did, really looked at how the enrollment numbers were rising, their enrollment projections were just much more in line with what ECI providers were seeing and expecting. So it's really about level funding, which which is good, for a program. So we're really thankful about that. There is an ECI, there was an ECI bill and also a budget rider that had to do with, there are some services in ECI that private insurance does not cover that Medicaid does. And really the state ends up picking up the tab for the cost of those services to families since private insurance doesn't cover them. That bill did not pass. And there was a budget rider that was going to study the issue, and I don't think that was ultimately included in conference committee. So we'll have to kind of keep looking into that over time. And then a couple of other things on the healthcare front. Thank you, Rochelle, for, before I get to that, thank you for bringing up that child abuse related bill. That was heard, I guess, today or yesterday in the Senate. And there was an additional component of that that people were worried about, which would provide kind of an affirmative defense for reporters who, in addition to needing to have a reasonable cause to sort of believe that there is abuse or neglect, there was also going to be a defense from prosecution if you had a kind of reasonable belief or you kind of reasonably looked into whether to report. And there were a lot of folks were worried about a situation like the gymnasts and Bella Caroli kind of situation where people, might have looked into it, but the alleged victims were very scared about speaking up. And then somehow they would have a defense from prosecution. So actually Lois Colcourse removed that affirmative defense from the bill today. So that's good news also on that legislation. And then the two other ones that are still out there pending that are, two of the biggest kids bills this session are the continuous healthcare coverage bill, that's 290, that's in Senate HHS. And that was written as a bill that would ensure continuous Medicaid coverage for kids for the full 12 months. That now has an amendment in Senate HHS to really take it down to, not 12 months, but 6 months and some other provisions. So I think that bill will continue to move, and that will be a source of, debate between the House and the Senate about where they land on the final language. And then the other one is the 12 months postpartum coverage for women in Medicaid, and that bill would have moved it from 60 days postpartum coverage to a year. And that also was amended just in Senate HHS to just add 4 months to go down. So it would essentially be 6 months of total coverage. And that also will probably become an issue that the House and Senate have to decide where they want to land together. So that is my update on the sort of cross issues. And I think, just to go back to childcare, thanks to Kim and everybody else who's been working really hard on those. This fingers crossed will turn out to be a really good childcare policy session. I mean, already some have passed, as folks have mentioned. Some of them have been a little under the radar because the legislature's had a lot of fish to fry, so to speak. But they're really good policy changes. So as a council, we'll grapple with that good news, hopefully, and see and do what we can to help agencies implement them really well too. So we appreciate everyone. Thanks.
Yeah, thank you. Any questions or other comments on this agenda? Megan, I had one screen. I'm not going to spend a great deal of time on this. There are a lot of bills proposed at the federal level that impact childcare. First 5 years put out a really good summary of all of this legislation. So if you're interested, you can link there. I'll just say that we're continuing to keep our eye on what happens federally. Lots more discussions happening. And with that, we will move along to agenda item 7, updates on early childhood events. Kim Coffrin, you want to tell us a little bit about your event?
Yeah, well, it's not my event, but I will.
Oh, that's true. About the event from the organization that you previously worked with.
That's right. But I'm so happy to share. But and they have it listed there, as I think I mentioned in March. NACI has updated our developmentally appropriate practice book. Those of us that have been classroom teachers and directors and have a child development degree, you know, it's our green book of Bible. So they have, I think it's the 4th edition, am I right, June? So they have published that, and they aren't doing in-person conferences either in June or the national one in November. So instead of doing a normal PLI June event, they are dedicating this time to go over the developmentally appropriate practice new edition and book. So it's the Developmentally Appropriate Practice Symposium. It is virtual. It is June 9th and 10th. If you touch children in the classroom as a director, a teacher, a coach, a trainer, I highly encourage everybody to attend. They've got some, the link is there. I'll put it in the chat as well, so you can link on it now. But they've got some great speakers lined up for the event, and it should be good stuff. And all of us early childhood geeks can dig into what's developmentally appropriate. So, and the big thing, listening to Sue Brennenkamp and the others talk over the last couple months, it's been, everything has changed in DAP and nothing has changed in DAP, but it's really focused on those equity lenses and how we really are approaching all children and all families. So that's that update.
All right, thank you. Sarah.
This is just to highlight a annual event that we host in partnership with the University of Texas CFRP Center. It's our Texas Fatherhood Summit. This year is a specific highlight on taking policy to practice and really thinking about what does the research tell us about engaging dads, creating positive outcomes for kids based on that engagement with dads, and then what can we actually do at the community level to improve that engagement. So if you are interested in dads, I highly encourage you to join us for this summit in June.
All right, thank you, Sarah. And Allison. Allison, are you online?
Sorry, slow to find the camera and mute button. So I think that I shared an update back in March that we would not be hosting our in-person early learning summit again this year. However, we are moving forward with a virtual early learning symposium. So this will have very similar content to what our in-person summit usually does. Training sessions that will be geared towards Texas Rising Star directors and teaching staff. And it will be held over a 3-week period in July. We'll have sessions every Tuesday and Thursday, and trying to accommodate those early childhood educator schedules. We have a lot of exciting content planned, and you can, let TRS programs that you know of, keep an eye out for the registration for this event.
Okay, thank you very much. And now on to our last agenda item. We have a couple of, well, actually we have 3 updates, and we are with 15 minutes left. So we have an update. So, Megan, are we going to do Shay first on the portal, or are we going to do Allison first on the plan?
Either's fine. I think we have in the lineup, Allison is next.
All right, Allison.
Okay, so we are required under the CCDBG statute to have a statewide disaster plan in place for childcare. This really is provides a mechanism for us as the lead agency to engage with all the partners that need to be at the table when a disaster happens, to help ensure continuity of childcare services across the state, as well as continuity around the subsidized children we're serving and those providers that serve those children. And it also addresses requirements that individual providers need to follow to ensure that they have an emergency preparedness and response plan as well. So we attached the draft of this statewide disaster plan to the meeting notice. This is an update. We do currently have a plan in place that was developed immediately following Harvey. So we already had some experience and had a pretty robust plan in place. But we wanted to give the council a chance to review it and provide input before this goes to commission action in, I think, a month. I think it'll be June 22nd. So please review that at your convenience, and you can send any questions, comments, or feedback to me. I will add my email address into the chat. And that's all I have.
Thank you. All right, and then TWC also has an update from Shay Everett on our online availability portal, which I referenced earlier.
All right, I will share my screen. Okay, can you see it?
Yes.
Wonderful. Well, a lot of you might remember this portal that was created a little over a year ago, and it has since been updated, expanded. There's a lot of new stuff, so I'll show you all that today. First, you can see that the new URL does not include the word frontline anymore, nor does the logo. So that was very helpful at the beginning of the pandemic and doesn't make so much sense now. So we've been working really closely with our IT folks and TEA, who originally hosted this website, to change this URL. So now it's find.childcare.texas.gov, super easy. You can see here at the top, you can apply for financial aid. That banner stays there unless you click the little X out of it. Over here, the little globe is a translation, English, Spanish. You can search right here at the top, which I'll do in just a second. You can also type in a child care provider here and start looking for a child care program if you're just here to look for a single child care program in the top right corner. You scroll down, it just shares what a parent may find on this website, filters, different options. And then at the bottom, there's 4 child care providers to update. They can go ahead and update their profile right here or send an email, which I am the one that answers those. So we usually, we answer emails from child care providers and parents weekly on this, as does our friends over at Child Care Regulation. They do answer some of the emails from child care providers for their logins. And so we really appreciate that partnership. Here, I will enter in an address. This is a university. Let's say a parent works there, type it in, click it here, done. Notice that a parent can search by home, work, zip code, or along my commute, which there you can do from your house to your work and search along your route that way. But we'll just stick with the work for now. You can say your method of transportation. Public transit is a really helpful option to a lot of parents. And then add children. Let's say I'm looking for a toddler. And click submit. So you can see here, I'll scroll out a little bit because you can see it's around a lot of other very interesting public sites here. So let me just zoom out so that those kind of disappear. So you can see here, all the options pop up on the right in a map form, just like many parents expect these days, whether they're using Google or Yelp. They can see it really easily and beautifully there. You can see the different search results here. They're listed in order of quality, if they're Texas Rising Star certified, and if they have told us they have openings. This week, we have about 1/3 of all open childcare providers reporting whether they have openings or not. It's been pretty consistent, and we are working to continue to get more childcare providers to share that information. You can see here, you know, there are lots of options in this area. And if it has a little checkbox, it means they're reporting their availability and certainly have options for you. And then if they have the little star, they're Texas Rising Star. You can always move the map around, zoom in, do redo search here, just like you can do on Google, and get more search results that way if that's easier. You can also search here if you want to only show providers that have reported their availability. You can search Texas Rising Star different levels. You can search various program options, children with special needs, all of these different options here. And then this is my favorite feature. You can search hours. Let's say I need to drop off my kid at 7 a.m. and I want to pick up around 6, and Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday. Those are pretty typical hours. So it expanded our search area a little bit to give parents more options, but you know, it did keep offering options for providers that did meet those needs. So as you click on a provider, it takes you to a little page about them. You can always click and go back to search results. You can see it's telling me it's 7 minutes from work, gives basic information about them, which we get from childcare. We get most of this information, the vast majority of it, from childcare regulation, except for whether they accept financial aid down here, that's from TWC, and if they're Texas Rising Star, that's from TWC, and the openings available. That's also the availability that we're collecting. Meals provided, snacks provided, has the different age groups served. Also, it very easily links over to the childcare regulation page for this specific operation. No need to search again. This is that specific operations, details and lists. They have 34 deficiencies. You know, you click on that and you go and look through that as a parent. And then also another great feature is that you can just click view profile. And this is another step, but it's very helpful. Let's say I'm this childcare provider, Discovery Kids, and I have a Facebook page, and maybe I don't have an actual website. I can use this unique URL to put on my Facebook page and share as my website to parents if I want. So that's something that can be very helpful to them. Also, from a parent perspective, if I want to go and share this with my husband and say, hey, found this great childcare program, let's look at it. I can also just copy and paste that URL and send it over to him. So there's that. And yeah, that's pretty much it for our most recent updates.
All right.
Congrats, Shay. That's awesome.
So, and I'll tell you guys, this was procured at the very beginning of the pandemic. And I want to thank Shay for all her work on this. I want folks to know that everybody talks about how slow government is. And, you know, we have a lot of processes and competitive procurement and all of those steps that we have to go through. Because of the pandemic, we were actually fortunate to be able to do an emergency procurement. And we stood up the initial version of this in
a week.
1 week. So when people say government moves slow, you know, in an emergency,
Oh, Reagan, you're muted.
You're on mute, Reagan.
Great. Sorry. So I wanted to tell you guys that this thing, it was pulled up quickly. I think it's incredibly helpful to parents. We really want to encourage childcare providers to use it. We got it up so quickly in a week, but now we're looking at how do we expand this? How do we build on it? How do we make it better? So I think we just have a lot of great opportunities here, and really encourage you guys to let childcare programs know about this, because we would really love to see the use go up.
Yeah, and one other thing to note, this is all 14,000 plus registered licensed childcare centers and homes that are shown and included on here. We don't include listed homes, though that's something that we could consider in the future, as long as they're very clearly denoted that they're not quite regulated the same. That was not something we were prepared to do at the beginning.
So Shay, all 14,000 are in there, but if they want to update their information, that's where they have to go in and update their availability with you.
Yeah, using that link that's on the landing page at the bottom. It takes less than 30 seconds. All a child care provider needs to know is their child care is their email address that they, you know, have associated with
licensing. Yeah. So so my second question is, what communication is going out to providers that this is available? I know we did it back at the beginning of the pandemic. So as they're applying for their stabilization grants, are you guys pushing this as well as they're contacting, or obviously we will help as a community, but how, what steps are you doing, and what kind of, do you guys have language that we can then use to put in newsletters and social media posts, et cetera?
Yeah, so this week, time these days. We emailed all the local workforce boards with new flyers for parents and for childcare providers, a desk aid for local community organizations or providers to use themselves that go step by step into how the provider can update their information, and you know, tips and a basic email template with the new features in it. So I'm happy to send that to Megan that she can share with all of you, and you can share with your provider network. That would be great.
That would be awesome. Kim, I'll also tell you that as we look at the next round of the ARPA stabilization grants, we are considering if there are other elements that we want to require or strongly encourage of providers. This could be one of those. The feds are asking states to be very careful about adding in requirements to receive funding. So we're trying to balance simple, easy, but at the same time with some other things that we're really interested in promoting. So it's a balancing act, and we're certainly considering this. Other questions, comments? All right, we are at the end of our agenda. I do want to remind all of the members that the next council meeting will be conducted a Zoom webinar platform on July 21st, 11 a.m. to 1 p.m. And again, thank everybody as we continue to all work together to serve the kids of Texas.
And
thank you all.
One quick logistical announcement just for the record. Both April Crawford and Julissa McDonald were present during the roll call. They were just on the public side. So just wanted to state that for the attendance record.
Fantastic. Happy to get that on the record. All right. Wonderful to see everybody.